Hi, Sachsenhausen. Polonia gwarna, parna, Germania richtig dicker Heil. Sachsenhausen. Wirtycie jak bambusik, trupie łebki to kaktusy heil. Es lebe kule der Kampf.
Welcome to Descendant Stuff, a podcast by and for the descendants of Sachsenhausen prisoners, working together to uncover the unanswered questions of its history. Sachsenhausen was a Nazi concentration camp located in Oranienburg, Germany, used from 1936 through April 1945. It was used as a labor camp, with a network of subcamps and worksites around the region, as well as a prison camp, death camp, medical experimentation center, and SS training ground. It was also the administrative center for all Nazi concentration camps. We are Jakob, Kelsey, and Nicole, three descendants of Sachsenhausen prisoners. Though our relatives were imprisoned for different reasons, we've discovered we have much in common. In each episode, we interview other descendants, researchers, and even survivors, sharing stories, memories, and research to build a clearer picture of the past, one that goes beyond the records. Through these conversations, we honor those who suffered and died at Sachsenhausen and strengthen our collective understanding of our own ancestors' experiences.
Today, I'm talking to somebody I'm very excited to interview because he can speak about a lesser-known group who was held at the camp. This is Tom Mustroph, who recently was at the commemoration of the 81st anniversary of the liberation of Sachsenhausen. And Tom was part of a group that held a ceremony recognizing the women who worked at the brothel at Sachsenhausen. Hello, Tom.
Hello.
I would like to start by asking you what role played the ceremony that just happened.
Yeah, during the decentral commemoration, we did also a small ceremony for the women who were forced to sexual exploitation in the camp of Sachsenhausen.
And you gave a speech when you did that. Can you describe what you said in your speech?
Yeah, the speech was held by my wife Barbara and by myself, so we shared a bit because we share also that initiative. Barbara initially spoke about the camp brothel itself, about the conditions, about the women who were there, and also about the fact that those women weren't recognized as proper victims for a lot of decades, and that only recently a special victims group was recognized as victims as they are. And then, because we know some of the names of the women who were held in Sachsenhausen in the barracks, I read the names and the age of the women and where they came from.
Like you read them out loud during the ceremony?
Yeah.
So maybe that was one of the first times that they were recognized out loud.
It's already the second time, because last year at the 80s ceremony, we did the same. Yeah.
Thank you for doing that. Can you tell me how you first found out about this group at Sachsenhausen?
Yeah, that was in another concentration camp at Dora Mittelbau. We were there as a group. We are kind of supporting group of the memorial site in Sachsenhausen, and we do several excursions to other memorial sites or also museums or other sites of historical interest. This time we went to Dora Mittelbau, and there on the map we found that there was marked so-called Sonderbaracke, special barrack. It was also written there that in that special barrack there was the brothel barrack of the camp, and we were quite astonished. Brothel barrack in the camp. Initially we thought it's for the guards, for the SS men. But then people there told us, no, it was for inmates. And we were astonished. A lot of people in our group weren't astonished because they knew about it, but we were kind of newcomers to this field. Yeah, then we also realized that barrack like this existed in Sachsenhausen also. And then we stumbled about that fact that those women aren't usually recognized, mentioned, and we thought that's not fair, if fairness is the right word in a context like that, and that they should be remembered. And for me, it was also because the Ukraine war was already running, and there came the news about that rapes of Russian soldiers in Bucha and other places. And that showed to me this topic of sexual exploitation isn't only a historical thing, but it's contemporary. It's in our times. And that was, for me, the second motivation to do something to commemorate these women. And we can't give justice to them. That's not possible because they are not living anymore. But at least to commemorate them and think about their lives and their destiny.
Yeah, and often with telling these stories, we can help better understand historical ways that people arrived in this position, and maybe that can inform our perspective today. Can you tell us a little bit about who these women were?
What we know is that in Sachsenhausen there were 17 women, maybe there were more, but for this 17 there is some documentation in the sense that about the first 10 we know that was the first group which came from the concentration camp Ravensbrück, the women's concentration camp, and then there was 2 other groups who came later, I guess 3 and then 4. So there's that paper trail. And for 10 of those women, there are also known the numbers and therefore the names. And we know that the youngest was, when she arrived at Sachsenhausen, was only 17 years old, and the oldest, I guess, below 30, something like 28 or so. And most of them were Germans, but also some Polish women were among them where we know who they were.
And how did it come about that they were brought to Sachsenhausen?
Yeah, as far as we know, as far as historians have researched this field, they were promised better conditions, more food to eat, and also that they only have to serve 6 months in the brothel and then they will be released. So that was quite a big motivation, and the women believed it, and later they found out that it wasn't like that because after a certain time, 3 months, 6 months, they were brought back to Ravensbrück and were still in the concentration camp. And one thing was also that there was promised to earn some money. And I mean, officially, the man had to pay for that, but with all what we know, what historians found out, no women got any Reichsmark.
So they were promised things that were never given to them. Those women maybe made decisions based on what they were promised, and then that turned out to be effectively a lie or false. Yeah. And can you speak to why there was a brothel at Sachsenhausen?
I mean, there are some documents by the SS that they thought that the productivity in the camps could be increased if workers, inmates, get this kind of satisfaction. And we shouldn't forget that the NS state was maybe the biggest brothel institution in the whole history of the world, because there were brothels for the army, for the Wehrmacht, there were brothels for the SS, there were also brothels for the foreign workers, because according to the race theory of the Nazis, the foreign workers who replaced German men in the factories shouldn't have sexual intercourse with German women. And to lead away their sexual energy, they thought, okay, then we have to provide them with prostitutes that they don't touch our German women. So, and that brothel system was huge, and so it was kind of logically to implement it also in the concentration camp, even if that sounds absurd, ridiculous, tremendous.
It sounds like some of the rationale behind the brothel was strategic for productivity and job satisfaction of the workforce. And additionally, it sounds like the ideas around race theory were somehow really integrated into it. Is that right?
Yeah. I mean, it was not only for the German workforce. I mean, for the foreign workers, it was international workforce. And in the concentration camps, it were Germans, but also men of other nationalities like the Netherlands, from Norwegia, who were allowed to use the service and who used it also. But it was also one part of the race theory, of course, because in the brothel system, there was that race theory applied, so that only Germans and so-called members of Nordic races could go to the brothels. Then there were other brothels, for instance, for the Ukraine auxiliary guards, also sometimes in concentration camps or beneath the concentration camps. And then there were the brothels for the foreign workers. And in the brothels for the foreign workers, there were women from other nations. And Germans should only have contact with so-called Arab people. So that whole system was also applied there, yeah.
You've mentioned that these women were from a so-called asocial group. Can you describe that group?
Some of them were put into this group. They had the green triangle, but there were also some women with a red triangle, so political prisoners among the women, at least what the literature says. What we know from the documents that in the first moment, the SS wanted to have already women who have had a kind of experience in sex work, or women which were labeled as asocial. And the problem is that the criteria are very wide, and it's a oppression mechanism. So we also don't know what is really true in applicating those criteria. And the thing is also that the women who were forced to do that sex work in the concentration camps later, after the end of the war, were again labeled as asocial, as prostitutes. And in some cases, they might have worked before also as prostitutes, yes, but we don't know, or it's not on to me to decide what brought them to that decision. And even the fact that afterwards they were again marked as not part of the society, for me is a scandal in itself.
It seems like this asocial group, based on interviews with other descendants of prisoners and accounts from researchers, this asocial group was just a handy label that could be manipulated as saying, we've cleaned these people up from society, we're taking all these asocial people, and then they get to use those people as slave laborers and tell the story that they want with them.
Yeah, I mean, it had also some kind of dynamic effect, because when the Nazis made their operations against asocial people, then the functionaries who had to fulfill this task had the duty to find, 10 or 20 or 100 people. And so they even from time to time were forced to take in everybody just to fulfill the numbers, just to fulfill the plan.
Yeah, so fulfilling numbers like a quota. The Nazis had a plan to build a forced labor system. And so these local authorities were following orders to put people in camps, maybe not for a particular cause, other than to fulfill that quota.
Yeah, people who even in that NS criteria weren't maybe asocial, but because they were caught in this repression machine and marked as asocial, then they got in triangle and they were marked for their life.
Speaking of which, something that is just hard to swallow as a fact is that it only in the year 2020 was this group of persecuted people recognized. Can you speak a little bit about that?
Yeah, a bit. I mean, I didn't follow it so much because on a certain degree I was also astonished that it came so late, and I was convinced in my naivete that it was already done earlier. I mean, I grew up in East Germany. We had it at school. We were fed up with it, and then it was fine. And I only dived a bit into it when we discovered the Jewish history and Jewish heritage of the house where we are living. And so then it came back also in a kind of other angle. But yeah, I was surprised that recognition came that late.
What it means for the women that you're describing is that they're labeled asocial. That marks them for their life. And when it came to getting some sort of recognition, maybe from the government, for the victims of Nazi persecution, those women were denied any kind of recognition for their suffering in their lifetimes for what happened to them.
Yeah, there was no application form, no application system to get a word or remuneration for this kind of experience. Yeah.
You've mentioned before that they were able to apply for some sort of recognition, and I believe it's because of the operations done on some of these women. Can you describe that or what you know of that?
Some of them could apply for sterilization, and I guess some of them also got some money for it, but what the documents say, it were only a few and only for that. And maybe Robert Sommer can talk more about those cases, because there were also women who tried to get some remuneration for that in developing false claims just to fit in the system, to get some rewards. And then that also shows the situation was that
After liberation, they were, as you said, marked for life. So they had a life of shame, but no official governmental acknowledgement it even happened. And the place where it happened still isn't acknowledged on the map at Sachsenhausen, at the site where it happened. Today, none of these women are living. What, to you, is the importance of recognizing them now?
Yeah, because world has not become much better, in some senses better, yes, but there's still the danger that societies get back to methods, solutions, terror systems, oppressions like that. And it is necessary to remember that it were not only systems where here are only the suppressors and they are the only victims. So it's not a black and white story, because especially with this camp brothels, as perpetrators were victims themselves. So to show that kind of dynamics of hierarchies in oppression dynamics is very important. I guess also that people can maybe avoid being caught again in these systems as oppressors, as victims, as oppressors who become victims, as victims who are oppressors to other victims.
Yeah, so by understanding the dynamics that made this possible, it would be very helpful to apply that knowledge in understanding what's happening today. Can you talk about your project at the Sachsenhausen campsite and your effort to create something that shows visitors and acknowledges the brothel and the women who worked there?
Yeah, I mean, I can tell a bit about the process, because at first it was just an idea of Barbara and me. And
Can you, for a moment, tell us about Barbara?
so, yeah, Barbara Gstaltmayr is my wife, and she was also the thriving force in discovering the history of the house here. And she then went to the supporting group of the memorial site in Sachsenhausen. And yeah, we had, when we got to know about that camp process, we both had the same instant, the idea, okay, we should do something. And then we we started with it, and we got the foundation where we are in also on our side. They support us and very much the memorial side, the directors there and the people who work there support that idea. And then we came to the point how to commemorate women who aren't alive anymore, where maybe also their families, their descendants, did not know what happened to them, because very often the women didn't talk about that. So in making public the full names of the women, maybe you do also harm to these families, because they are confronted with something what they didn't know and where they are maybe ashamed of. And so that also means to find ways not to hurt again people. And then also aesthetically, what kind of memorial thing is thinkable today in the 21st century? And then I had the idea that we should ask this question to young artists. And we went to sculptures class at the University of Arts, UDK, a class of Monica Bonvicini, an installation artist and sculpture artist. And she agreed on the spot, let's say. And now this class is developing ideas how a more memorial sign could look like, and they are thinking to whom it should be addressed and what should be mentioned there, and if it's more for the information side or more for the emotive side, should it be something material, something immaterial, more video art, more sculpture, more installation. And they are developing it. And then, of course, is the next level, how it fits in the concept of the memorial site itself, because they also have their restrictions. But we, at the beginning, didn't want to give already those restrictions to the young artists, because we, and I guess also the people working at the memorial site, are quite curious how a young generation with artistic knowledge tackles this issue. And 3 days ago, we were together at 81st anniversary, also with a lot of those students. The class came to the memorial site, and I was reading the names and the age of the women. It became clear for all of us that the women had approximately the same age as the students.
The people who might make this artwork would be the same age as the women who worked in that brothel. So they would really recognize what that might have been like to live.
Yeah, I mean, that appeared in that moment when we read the names and the age, and I guess it impressed young artists again. I mean, they were already moved by his stories and this context, but that gave also another spin of the story, because you can easily, you can try to imagine what that would have meant to yourself. Maybe you can't imagine, but you are immediately forced to think about it, to reflect about it.
Can you tell me if there's been any contact with descendants of those women in this process?
No, for us not. I mean, I know that the historian Robert Sommer has some more contacts, but that are people who were not in Sachsenhausen, and they are also living in other places in Germany. So it was for us not so easy to start this contact, but also it was not in, let's say, our camp, to put it like that.
It sounds like maybe if a listener is a descendant of these women, that maybe that would be a welcome connection.
Of course, we would be very glad to have contact with descendants and to know more about it, to share what we know, and to put these women on the right place in history and commemoration procedures.
Thank you very much for having this discussion and helping recognize this group and recognizing their place in history and in current events.
Yeah, I mean, thank you for the opportunity to talk about it. And I mean, it's one thing we can do to conserve the knowledge of things which happened and shouldn't happen again.
Listener, if you would like to see photos of the ceremonies we talked about in this conversation, you can visit the Descendant Stuff website and click on this episode, number 36. You'll see those photos of the ceremonies that Tom and Barbara held with students working on the project and what the current site looks like today. If you'd like to know more about the brothel at Sachsenhausen, who was there, how it worked, and how it was part of the Nazi system, go to episode 35. You can hear the interview with Robert Sommer, who has beautifully researched and published a book on this topic.
Descendant Stuff podcast is produced by Jakob Feistauer, Kelsey Snook, and Nicole Wines, 3 descendants of Sachsenhausen prisoners and co-creators of the Sachsenhausen Stuff project. The Descendant Stuff team would like to extend a special thank you to the team at Sachsenhausen Memorial and Museum, especially Dr. Astrid Lai and the members of the Educational Department's project, What Voice Do We Have?, as well as the Descendants Collective Voices of the Next Generation. The theme song, Heil Sachsenhausen, was written by Alexander Kulisiewicz while he was imprisoned at Sachsenhausen and performed by him after the war. It is used with permission from the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum's Kulisiewicz collection. If you are a Sachsenhausen descendant who would like to share your story, please contact us through our website at www.sachsenhausen-stuff.com or use the Contact Us link in the show notes below.
Heil Sachsenhausen. A jak będę jutro wzdychał lewą nóżką, ci zawtikam. Heil, es lebe Gold, o Kampf.